Hey there. Today I am thrilled to be talking with Ricky Brigante about Inside the Magic, immersive entertainment, and so much more. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here on episode 48 of the Tomorrow Society Podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. When I think back to what got me so into Disney, especially as an adult, there obviously were the family trips when I was younger. But, as I got into high school and college, Disney was still a thing for me, but it wasn't as big a deal, especially in those years after I graduated from college, where I was busy getting a job and just traveling to other places. And Disney was always in the back of my brain, but it wasn't as big a thing. When I think back to how I ended up right here talking with you on this podcast, part of it relates to all the Disney podcasts that sprung up, around 2005 or so. You had shows like WDW Today with Len Testa, Matt Hochberg, and the Mikes. You had the Diz Unplugged with Pete Werner and the whole team. You had a little bit later Doug Barnes and the Season Pass. There are too many to mention, but one of the biggest ones for me was Inside the Magic. It was one of the first out there, and what connected with me initially was podcasts were so early on, and you had this guy, Ricky Brigante, who it seemed like just jumped on and talked about what he liked about Disney World. He had segments, he had background music. It was very well done, but the fandom is what I connected with right away. I looked at it as, this guy is so into Disney World. He's living in Orlando. It's like being down there, which for someone who hadn't been there as often in the recent years when he started, it was a really big deal for me. So it's really cool now to talk to Ricky so much later here in 2018 and find out what he was thinking when he started the site, and even more recently when he sold it earlier this year. And it's exciting too because this isn't the end of his story. He's now working on the creative side of the business, and it's exciting to hear his passion for what he's currently doing right now. Given the connection I have with his show and what he did, 13 years ago, it's really cool to have a chance to talk with him here on the podcast. And I'm excited to bring it to you. So I don't want to talk any longer. I just want to get to it. Let's go talk to Ricky Brigante. Okay, I'm here with the founder of the Inside the Magic podcast going back to 2005, which then expanded and became a juggernaut for covering Orlando attractions. He has recently sold Inside the Magic, and he is working on immersive entertainment at Pseudonym Productions. It is Ricky Brigante. Ricky, thanks so much for joining me here on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. I definitely want to talk to you about Inside the Magic's history. I was a listener in the very early days when you were just getting started, but I'd like to start with what you're currently doing as a producer and technical director at Pseudonym Productions. How did you get started working with them?
Yeah, it's been a crazy wild ride. Even those who were listening to the Inside the Magic podcast probably heard the beginnings of it a few years ago when I got sort of wrapped up in a project called The Republic when Pseudonym was a very young company. That was about three and a half years ago. And it was something that I initially sort of jumped into just as, this sounds like a cool thing coming to Orlando that I want to write about. And I thought it was so cool that I actually wanted to join the team and be part of it. And everything kind of took off from there. That did really well. We were part of the Orlando Fringe Festival. It was something that was rather hard to describe, sort of a blending of immersive theater and, bringing in some video game elements into real life. And, sort of like exploring and discovering spaces while engaging with actors and being part of this sort of elaborate story. And I felt like there was a lot to that, and I wanted to keep running with it. So we really put our heads down. And since then, we've done 3 more wildly successful productions in Orlando, ranging from, like 15,000 square feet full of similar type of entertainment to a lot more sort of intimate Halloween time experiences that really pushed boundaries and allowed people to come out of their comfort zone and explore parts of themselves that perhaps that they didn't even know they had, which is a big theme about what we do. So it's been a great lot of fun over the last few years, to the point where I wanted to do it full time.
Well, great. Yeah. And coming from, being so into Disney, which in general, their attractions are more static, or you might shoot at something, but they're pretty basic. So what really excites you about working in more of an interactive space rather than maybe what's going on with some other theme parks?
Yeah, well, what's great is this is, as far as I'm concerned, the direction of live entertainment. The days of sort of passively sitting in a seat and watching a movie, a stage show, even nightlife in general, going out to a bar, going to a nightclub, going to any sort of hangout where you literally just do a lot of sitting around. And we've already become a rather sedentary society. We're staring at our screens, staring at our phones, sitting around, not even necessarily engaging with the people that are immediately around us anymore. It's not a healthy lifestyle. It's not a healthy way of being people. And so it's great to see, not only the work that we're doing at Pseudonym, but others in sort of a similar space, trying to get people to really come out of their seats and off their screens and engage once again, face to face, eye to eye with other people, but do so in some kind of fun framework so that there's no pressure. Sure, you can go to a bar, you can go to a nightclub and try to chat up people, but that's really awkward most of the time, especially for like introverts like me. And it's just not fun. This is a way that we can wrap that in a context of excitement and fun and mystery and intrigue while allowing you to be a person and socialize and meet new people.
No, that's great. We've seen a surge in popularity along with that of like escape rooms and such, but I feel like a lot of that is you have people come in and they work together as a group. But what interests me about what you're doing is that a lot of times you're interacting with the actors. I almost feel like it's this weird mix of theater, but instead of sitting like at a Broadway production and they're performing for you, you're kind of performing together. That really interests me. I mean, what is the typical audience that you'll see for your type of productions that you're doing?
It is definitely a really interesting mix of genres, of entertainment types. There is certainly an element of theater to it. But while immersive theater is a very specific thing, it is, essentially a moving play. It is, yes, the actors are the stars of the show, and you get to move around and interact and sort of, follow along. We're kind of rolling with that and taking it further to where it's almost like, if you think about it in video game terms, when you're running around, you are the star of the video game. You are the main character. You encounter a lot of other people and go on all these main quests and side quests, but ultimately they are all there to support you and your story. And that's the angle that we take it from. Not that you necessarily have to ever perform. We don't want anyone, to feel like they're on the spot or anything. It's you just be you, or be whatever version of you want to be. Do what you want to do, and we are there to support you and make the world around you exciting. And I forgot what your question was.
Oh, that's okay. I think you pretty much covered. I was just asking kind of the type of people that go.
No, it's really interesting. We thought for sure, getting into this, okay, we were going to attract the millennials and the younger audiences, maybe into the 30s, about my age, and people who grew up with video games and people who are really valuing experiences over stuff. And, that's a big thing now. And so we certainly got that audience. But what really surprised us was that it kept going. We had frequent repeat players that were in their 60s and 70s who, by day are doing some, I don't know, they work at like Lockheed Martin on super top secret government stuff and military things. But then they get a chance to sort of unleash another side of them through this and be another version of themselves, which is phenomenal to see people in their 20s and people in their 60s playing together. It's something that we as adults don't necessarily do enough of. And you mentioned escape rooms. That's a great example of a newer type of entertainment that allows adults to kind of just play, and puzzles and all of that, and it's great. This is another version of that we want people to just be that raw sort of child self, where you don't worry about any judgment or ridicule, that you can just be open and play along and have fun.
Oh, that's great. And I agree with you that the experiential entertainment is something that, because it's in terms of things like, it's so easy to sit at home and watch Netflix or watch something that you have to have something that's more attractive to somebody and is going to be unique. And so how challenging is it for the logistics? Because I watch, I have not been to one of your productions. I live in Missouri, but I've watched, the videos and various things. And I look at that and it looks amazing, but I'm trying to picture behind the scenes. I mean, what kind of development time does it take to build one of these?
It depends. Our biggest production, When Shadows Fall, a couple of years ago, we were in development for, I think almost a year before we started building. And then we had a phase of 3 or 4 months of, constructing walls and, dressing the sets and designing the music and installing all the tech and the lighting and everything. And then ultimately, it was about a year total, probably in development and building everything up. And then we were open for 3 months, which is, it seems weirdly out of balance, but it's one of those things that we want to keep being fresh and new. But at the same time, we've done a Halloween experience last year that we only ran for 5 nights, and that we spent about 2 to 3 months not full time. So sort of, part-time developing that. So it really depends on the complexity of it, but there are always a lot of moving parts, not only physically, but also more importantly, really what we really try to get to is the psychological aspect of it, to make sure that people are feeling how we want them to be feeling, or feeling the right way, and getting out of it sort of the message and the themes that we want them to take away.
No, and that's great. And you mentioned Halloween, and we've seen just in the Orlando area such an increase in what's happening like at Halloween Horror Nights with Universal and then other parks. They've expanded that to a larger extreme, but it's still in a lot of ways. A lot of those houses are incredible, but you're going through a house kind of in an older format,
Right.
What do you do to kind of make Pseudonym seem different? Because obviously if somebody says, well, I already go to Halloween Horror Nights, it's cool. They have The Walking Dead or, Stranger
Sure.
Things. What do you guys do to kind of show how you're different from that?
Well, first, I have to say I'm completely geeking out over Stranger Things being there this year.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be amazing.
I can't wait. Yeah. Even if sure, yes, they do traditional haunted houses, but they do them the best anywhere. They're incredible. They have, though, experimented with similar elements to this. A couple years ago, they did at Universal Orlando, they did the Repository, which was definitely borrowing a lot of immersive theater elements. They also mixed in some virtual reality, and they didn't do that again last year, which, I don't know what that means, if it wasn't successful or if they're developing something else. I'm not sure, but it's something they've been toying with. Likewise, not to stray too far from your question, but Disney, obviously, with Star Wars Land and the Star Wars Hotel particularly, is really diving deep into these similar areas of being able to sort of live out your own path, your own story, be part of it, which I'm really excited to see how they manage to, sort of scale that up to the thousands and thousands of people that need to be participating into that for them, and also from young kids onward, and also still make it a sort of emotionally connected, rewarding experience for everyone. That's definitely a major challenge. So but anyway, that aside, to your question, I think there is it's almost completely different. What we have done for Halloween is not a haunted house. We never actually intended to scare people. There are no boo scares. There's no jump out frights. You honestly probably wouldn't even scream the entire night once. We have done 2 Halloween time experiences. One definitely was intended to make you sort of more creeped out. So, the sort of goosebumps feeling. And then the other was really just sort of embracing the weirdness factor of Halloween and building off of that into, okay, we accept that during Halloween season, we're going to walk into these weird worlds of could be the worlds of, Freddy and Jason and Leatherface and all of that. But in our case, we decided to take you into your dreams and into your nightmares, whatever that means. And there's even, I mean, that's what Freddy Krueger did with Nightmare on Elm Street, but we didn't do it from a slasher perspective. We did that in a sort of like, what are the horrors, the nightmares that make you wake up in a startle and sweating, or the ones that they're good dreams, maybe your fantasies and all of that. Where in this real life world that you're actually living, where would you go if presented with the same opportunities that you are in your dreams? Would you go as far as you do when you're just dreaming? Whatever that means to you. And we left that very open-ended and presented people with a lot of opportunities to literally choose different paths. And everyone had a different experience. And we were incredibly surprised and impressed with how much people were willing to put themselves out there and really do various, engage in activities that they probably in real life would look at that and be like, whoa, I wouldn't do that. But they felt safe and comfortable. And it was a great way to get people to, like I said before, explore different sides of themselves.
No, that's really interesting. And I like the difference, like you're explaining, between even something amazing at Universal and what you guys are doing. One, because you don't have to scale it up as high, because that's what I wonder. You mentioned Disney's Star Wars Hotel, and I'll ask you what you think about that, because not as much even the hotel, the Star Wars land. Mm-hmm. To me, they're talking about things that sound somewhat similar to what you're saying. And it's, in theory, it sounds incredible. And I'm really interested to see what they do. I just don't know how they can do that with so many people, because even if they close off the land they're going to have to at a certain cap, you're talking thousands and thousands of people. So, I mean, it seems exciting, but as someone who's created something on a different scale, do you think there's any way they can do it where it doesn't end up seeming almost just pretty generic?
This is literally the biggest conversation about this whole sort of growing industry. It is the matter of scale, because when you do reach a certain number of people, you can't give people that one-on-one, intimate, personal connection for hours on end. It's impossible without a one-to-one cast. If you have 1,000 people and you had 1,000 cast members, sure, but that's unrealistic. Likewise, so far with what we've been doing, we have been delivering on that, but we've had to scale it way, way down. I mean, the most people we've had in a single experience at a time so far is about 45, which is significantly less than several thousand.
Yeah.
We're working on that problem for sure. Like, how do we scale up what we're doing? But at the same token, Disney is, I'm sure, having that conversation of, okay, how do we scale down from what people are used to? These, here's a ride that gobbles up thousands of people an hour. Okay, great. You sat there, you saw a thing, you didn't participate. If you did participate, maybe you pushed a button. How do they deliver on those promises that they've been giving of living out your own Star Wars story? I don't know that they can do it to the fullest, wildest imaginations of the biggest, geekiest Star Wars fans, but I'm hoping that at least on some level, from what I understand, it'll be the ability to like choose a side. Are you with the Rebel Alliance or whatever they're called these days? Or are you with the First Order side of things? And which path do you take? Are you being bounty hunted because you did this one thing on a ride? Where does that lead you? It'll be a few sort of baby steps along that direction, where maybe if you just sort of passively sat there, you would have the standard experience. Whereas if you actively were like, no, I'm choosing this, great, you made a choice. But that's more, choose your own adventure rather than actually personally connecting with something.
Yeah, and I agree. I think they might be able to do more in the hotel, but at the land, it's going to be very limited. But I think Disney recognizes, like Universal did, like you mentioned with Halloween Horror Nights, that this is an emerging type of entertainment. They can't, I love old school attractions at Epcot or whatnot, where you sit on an Omnimover and you ride and you see some scenes. But Disney has to recognize, especially with millennials and younger people, that that's not going to do it. So I think it's interesting what they're trying to do, and I'm really intrigued to see what happens. And you mentioned for Pseudonym that you're trying to scale up. And I know I've heard you mention that you're looking, because all of your presentations so far have been in temporary spaces, not spaces that you own, not a permanent place where you stay. Is that the next step for you, to find a permanent space so you could have, maybe 3 productions in a year or whatever the number is, or even possibly have something that people can go to each day?
Yes, in part. We are definitely eyeballing at some point settling down. I hesitate to even use that phrase because we're never going to settle. It's sort of a mix, I think, for us. Like, we would definitely love to have, and we're aiming to have, some sort of quote unquote headquarters in which we can sort of set up, not only having a permanent place to have, a production or a rotating series of productions or even simultaneous ones, but also a place for us to live as a company and for us to run. I mean, the 4 productions we've done so far, we liken to R&D tests. We've been figuring out what works, what doesn't, how it works on on this level and that level, and we've come to some fantastic conclusions through those tests. But we have so many more things we do want to test, and so that's something that we're going to continue to do alongside continuing to put on, whether it's a pop-up experience or something more permanent. So the best word to use right now in our state of things is that we are in development of a number of different concepts that when the right time and the place comes along, we will be ready to roll it out.
No, and that sounds great because, that is the next step. Now, the flip side of that is with any business, when you have permanent space, whether you're leasing it or, buying it or whatnot, is that adds financial burden, where then there's this whole other level of you have to make more. So is that a big challenge that you're considering? Is how do you then scale up in order to cover more expenses?
Let me tell you, there is no greater expense than paying rent. Rent is a horrible thing, and that's been our number one challenge in moving from place to place, is finding agreeable, landlord relationships that allow us to stick around as much as we can without breaking the bank. And so for us, I think eventually moving to a permanent space will be the right move. I mean, it's the reason, Disney set foot here. They were running out of space in California, and Walt Disney came out here for the luxury of land in Orlando and cheap land at that. And so it's a rough problem at first to find that perfect magical place, but once you do and you can set up roots there, good things come of it.
For sure. And, speaking of kind of a permanent place, I think back to the Adventurers Club, which I visited several different times over the years and loved. And, in a weird way, I love Disney, but it was almost too cool for Disney World in a way, because I felt like it was so, you go in and you're like, I can't believe how interactive this is, and that people are just making kind of jokes that skirt that line. Do you think it's possible? The one challenge with that, I mean, obviously Disney didn't think it made enough money, because people would just go and hang out. Maybe they didn't spend as much or drink as much or whatnot. Is it possible to create something like that and actually, charge enough or get enough interest where people just keep coming back over and over and over again?
Yeah, there's been a few things that have been, variations of that. I think of the Jekyll and Hyde establishments up in New York, which is a very similar setup, different theme, more on the horror side of the world, but it had, a really cool bar restaurant atmosphere where you could explore, and, there's interactive stuff, and then there were actors there playing parts, just like the Adventurers Club. And we've definitely taken some inspiration from both of those things. Adventurers Club is an interesting thing because years ago when I went, I was not the biggest fan of it, and I think it was, I loved the structure of it. I loved what they were doing. It's just like my personal taste. It was a little too silly for me.
Yeah.
And that's because, like you were saying, it was at Disney, so it had to be that brand of entertainment, and it pushed, the edge, the levels of that. There were definitely there was a lot of adult humor there, which I appreciated, and it certainly was geared more towards adults, being a bar at its heart. But I think what you were saying is correct. It wasn't the right fit for Disney for that time. However, I could totally see now, like, for example, if Disney built the Star Wars Cantina, and that was a thing that you could go visit, and it was flooded with actors, and you could live in that area and inhabit that world just to be there. and there would be things that played out. I think it is possible for something like that to work at Disney with the right mentality. But outside of that, sure, same. There's no reason why with the right business model, whatever that might be, something like that couldn't work.
Yeah, and that Star Wars example, it's fascinating because that's something where they would have to cap, like they'd sell 200 tickets in a night and but they could charge. Even me, I'm a Star Wars fan, but I'm not I grew up with it, growing up in the 80s, but there's some people that would pay who knows what every night to do that. I think we're giving them a free idea here.
Oh, I'm sure they've thought of this already. But what's interesting about what you just said is this is inherently the problem that Disney uniquely is facing right now. They have, most businesses are like dying to have more and more people come in. Disney's actually reaching the problem, especially in California, of what do we do with all these people? They've started down a path that is not good for a lot of people. That is, we're just going to keep charging more and more and more and more for things because that will inherently weed out those who can't afford it, and thus having a better experience for those who can at a higher price. And so Disney actually ends up making more money off of fewer people, which many would say goes completely against, sort of Walt Disney's original intent. But I don't know how long you can actually hold on to that. At some point you have to realize who your customer is and make sure your product is quality. Going to Disneyland when it's a sold out day every day and you're just jammed shoulder to shoulder, that's not a pleasant experience for anyone. So it's, if the only answer to that is continuing to raise prices or to, as they did with Pixar Pier out at DCA recently, they had, one day before it opened to everyone else, they had a, $200 or $300 ticket to go, and just only perk of that essentially, there was some small stuff, but essentially was you get to be here and be comfortable. You're not here with 50,000 people, you're here with 5,000 people, and you can enjoy this. And I it's exactly what you just said about the bar. It would be sure, we have this very awesome, amazing, intimate experience that you have to book 6 months in advance and pay $500 for. And those who can do it are going to love it.
You've hit on exactly how I feel because, coming from Disney for years and even visiting after in the 2000s when it was dead. And part of me is like, I love that. It was so empty. It was great. But I understand financially what they're doing because personally, if somebody told me you can pay $200 a day and go to Disneyland and you can get on everything, and I'd say, awesome, I'll do it.
Right.
But then part of me in the back of my head's like, wait, you're falling into the trap. That's what they want. But they're so stuck over there. It's such a challenge. And so I want to make sure we get time. We've kind of circled around Disney a lot here, and I want to make sure we get time to talk about Inside the Magic, which I'm sure you've talked about ad nauseum over the years. But before that, before you even started Inside the Magic, how did you get interested even in theme parks where you would want to do that?
Right. It's been my whole life, essentially. I was born in Miami, Florida. And once I got to stroller age, my parents took me at least once a year up to Orlando so we could do the Disney thing. Go to the Magic Kingdom, ride Pirates, ride Haunted Mansion, all the wonderful things. And as I got older, we started bringing friends with us on that trip. And so I got to go there. And then at some point, I started going with other friends, and it just kept, it became, it was always a part of my life. And for whatever reason, I've always been very technical minded, sort of when I got a speak and spell when I was very young, I tried to make it do things that it couldn't do, I tried to, write messages and make it say things. And when I got a little word processor, I started drawing ASCII art on it before I even knew what ASCII art was. And, it's always been sort of baked in me. So when I went to a theme park, even as a young age, I loved the entertainment. But I also found myself staring at the lighting rigs and the speakers and wondering how it all worked together. And so I shared this sort of dual fascination with the product itself, which is amazing, obviously. And then how did this come to be? At that point, I didn't really care about who. I wasn't even really thinking about who, but more about just like the what. What is this? How did it happen? At some point, of course, that led me to, there are these people, Imagineers. They do this. They create these and other, designers all over, not just at Disney, but throughout all the themed entertainment world. And it just kept sort of building from there to the point where, I went to college for 4 years for computer science. And in the mix of that, I discovered the Walt Disney Imagineering Imaginations competition that allowed college students to submit theme park designs, attraction ideas and designs for a chance to potentially become an intern in Imagineering. I was just like, oh my God, sounds amazing, and ended up becoming a finalist for that. Got flown out to Glendale and presented in front of Tony Baxter and Marty Sklar and John Hench, and I got second place in that, which was phenomenal. But then somewhere along in that process, I realized that was all it was more corporate than I realized it was going to be. It wasn't just a bunch of artists having fun. I mean, of course it isn't, but it was too corporate. And I didn't know, I was just in college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided at that point to just move to Orlando and see where life was going to take me. And that's when podcasts became a thing. And so I was just like, okay, sure, let's do this. Let's channel my passion for theme parks into this whole podcast thing. And it was just going to be a hobby. And there it went.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that similar stories, a lot of people, whether they do a podcast or some other creative realm, they always seem to be like that, where it's like, well, I went there and I was there at the right time, and that's where it went. Because I think back to that time, or I graduated from college in 98, kind of didn't pay as much attention to Disney, but one of the things that got me back into it was some of those early podcasts. I mean, you had yourself, and Lou was with Nathan on Mouse Tunes, and you had the original WDW Today, and there wasn't much, though. You were one of the very few. So how important for you do you think it was that you started when there weren't a lot of shows and were able to kind of connect with an audience so early?
Tremendously important. I think it's completely possible to enter a crowded space and get noticed, but it's easier to enter an empty space and get noticed. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I was just a dude with a computer and a microphone that I had lying around my house, and I just sort of figured it out as I went. Because of that, I didn't have to immediately be like super awesome professional. I could just be me. And it definitely helped. There was literally only one other Disney podcast in existence when I started, the Mouse Pod, and I believe he stopped doing that within a few months. So then I all of a sudden became the longest running, the oldest, the whatever. And that definitely worked to an advantage to just keep that going with regularity. And I didn't miss a single week for like a decade, which in hindsight is absolutely nuts. Like, I don't know how I did that, but that was huge, definitely.
So, I mean, I can't imagine you mentioned entering a crowded space. I'm very familiar with that, having started this like 3 years ago. But to do it when technology, the one benefit for someone like me is that technology is so easy. I am not a computer scientist or programmer or an expert. It's very straightforward. But at the time, I think it was more, I wouldn't say the Wild West, but you were learning as it went. Was that a challenge for you to figure that out?
It wasn't a challenge for me to figure out the technical aspects. I mean, I've always been sort of tech minded, and I did 4 years of computer science school, Georgia Tech, and like when I looked at this, I was like, oh, you need an RSS feed, cool. I don't know what that is, but 10 minutes later, I knew what it was. Everything was by hand. I created a bad little website just coding by hand. I was manually updating the RSS feed every week. There was no such thing as the iTunes podcast anything, like Apple hadn't even officially acknowledged podcasts yet, despite the name. So it very much was very Wild Westy. It was like, hi, I'm over here in a vacuum doing this thing. I remember I was posting early on WDW Magic, which is still, incredibly popular forum today. I was posting on there, and I was just like, hey, this is a thing that I'm doing if anyone wants to listen, and, sort of not even knowing what promotion meant or anything. I don't know. It just happened.
Well, it's great that you were able to start then. Not that, I think the show was good enough where it would have connected anyway, but how long did it take you really to realize, okay, this is different than what I thought. This isn't a hobby that I just going to do and 50 people or 100 or whatever. When did you really realize, hey, this could be a business. This could be my life?
It's funny. I don't know that the files are still available anywhere, but if anyone still has, a record of the old podcasts, you can hear a change when that happens. I want to say it's around like 1 year in, like show 60-ish. There's like an improvement in sound quality, and I speak a little bit differently, and all of a sudden there's like a sponsor of the show, because I started I never anticipated like travel agencies would be writing me and be like, oh, you have X number of people that are listening to you. We have the same audience, and we would give you money to mention our name. I'm like, really? That's a thing? Okay, sure. Yeah, it was somewhere about a year in that it started sort of really picking up steam to become something more than just, this thing I do on the side for fun. It definitely was still fun, but at that point I was like, oh, this is something I actually have to like pay attention to and try, and not just wing it every week.
You can't just turn on the mic and just say,
right, exactly.
Here's what I think about Disney.
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, because at that point I did start to establish a vision of like, oh, this needs to be something more if it's going to go anywhere, if I want it to. If I don't, I can just keep doing what I'm doing, Right,
for sure. So eventually you had a point where you needed to hire or at least get help. How is that? Because, when you're doing a podcast by yourself, the one benefit is you're everything. You're the producer, the host, the writer, all of that. How tricky is it to then hire people and then actually have to be a boss, not just the podcaster?
So here's what's interesting about that. I never thought about any of that or really thought of it as a quote unquote business or being a boss or hiring people until only like the last 2 years of being so only a few years ago, like a couple years ago. Before that, it was still very sort of ragtag, whatever happens. Like I had a direction and I knew I was trying to do something, but I didn't really have a cohesive picture of it. So I got very lucky early on, very, very early. Like within a few months, I got, an email from this guy named Ben who had worked at Radio Disney at some point. He was like, hey, I've got some, abilities and I've got the equipment and stuff, and I love Disney, and I was a cast member, and why don't I throw some audio at you each week, and you can, add it to your show to have another voice. So I was like, okay, do it, whatever, just do something. And so for years, he of course was Skipper Ben, who became sort of the co-host of the show. For many years, honestly, he and I had never even had an actual like phone conversation for a couple of years. Like we never met. We literally just exchanged some emails, and he would send me a 10 to 15 minute segment like Saturday night or Sunday morning, and I would throw it in the show. Sometimes I wouldn't even listen to it right away. I would just be like, I trust him. I'm just going to throw it in the show. Everything he does is great. And that evolved from there. And then over time, I would just get people coming and going, being like, hey, I'm bored. I want to do something. Here's some stuff. And that evolved into like Mark and Jay doing these insanely amazing, elaborate, like audio drama history segments those were insane. I loved those pieces, and I loved getting them. Like I was a fan of what I guess was my own content, because I didn't hear that stuff until it was done. And I would get, hey, we want to do a segment about the history of Spaceship Earth. Okay. 2 weeks later, I'd receive this masterpiece of a 20-minute audio adventure. I'd be like, thank you. and so the only time when I finally got to, to go back to your question, to the point where I needed to actually hire people legit, is when it got to the point where I could not handle it alone full-time anymore, which was only a few years ago when really YouTube started picking up steam. The website started picking up steam. We were going to multiple events on both coasts. I was flying back and forth multiple times a year, and I just hit the point of like exhaustion. And then, of course, I started doing Pseudonym on top of all of that. And so I was just like, okay, I need to figure out how to get someone else involved with this. And so I went through, a variety of people that had to figure out the right team of people that would actually even push that farther than I could ever hope to do alone. And as it turned out, in the end, the website and YouTube channel were endlessly or orders of magnitude bigger than the podcast ever was, which is, that just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's funny to think about, because I think, oh, the YouTube's been big for years or whatever, but it's actually the way time moves with the internet. Things really have exploded there in not as much time. It's crazy how things have kind of worked, where everything seems to speed up and you forget what things were like even 5 years ago or something.
Oh gosh, I mean, when the podcast started, there was no YouTube, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter. It's like the dark ages.
How did we live? Now,
Right, arguably better.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the internet, yeah, the internet can be a nasty place. And, especially Disney or Diz Twitter, as it's called, there's all these questions about authenticity or about all of that, which, are a little tiring. But I'm curious, though, as Inside the Magic grew, was it hard, like when Disney said, okay, you can come to our events and all those things, was there any challenge did you consider things like, okay, I need to be professional with Disney, but I also I don't want to lose my voice or what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. That was okay. So very early on with the podcast, I had emailed Disney because Expedition Everest was opening, and I saw they were doing one of their big media splashes, and I on a whim I was like, maybe by some miracle I could actually go to this thing. That would be fun. Naturally, in that time they didn't know what to do with a website or a podcast, and so they said, no, that's not really something that we're doing right now. Cut to years later when, I was in the thick of all of that world, and somewhere in the middle, I definitely I had a realization that what I was doing was not just guy with a microphone, it was journalism, and I had to live up to some real important journalistic ethics and, really make sure that I never crossed any boundaries or borders with regards to, accepting gifts or being, as some would say, being a shill for the company. I never wanted to venture in that way. I always wanted to make sure I retained my own voice and my own opinions about things and was separate from that. But at the same time, it's a weird line to walk. It's like, okay, the only way to cover this but in advance and get the best coverage is to come to our event. Okay, that's fine. That's fair. And when I arrive, there's a giant welcome package of gifts for me. Okay, cool. So I'm not going to write about those gifts. I'm not going to talk about those gifts. I'm just going to, whatever. I'll take them. I'll put them aside. I don't really care. I'm going to focus on the coverage. And then I'll turn that hat off and I'll be a fan again and be like, oh, look at this cool stuff. So it was about having a split personality. When I was in work mode, I was in work mode. And if anyone ever saw me at an event, I was there 100%. I wanted to do the best work possible and showcase something in the light that it deserved to be showcased. I knew a lot of hard work and talent went into these things, and a lot of Imagineers and designers didn't really get the credit for their work. Disney would often parade around, and still does, the one or two people who are the head of a giant project of hundreds of people. And that always depressed me a little bit. I was like, there's so many talented people that don't get credit. And so I always wanted to support that work, support the people behind it, and never get too negative, never get too unnecessarily critical, but at the same time, offer a bit of a critique in that eye, because that is what journalism is supposed to be. So it is a weird world to navigate for sure.
Yeah, and it's there's a difference too between saying, okay, that didn't really work for me, or that's not my thing, and saying that is terrible. Everyone who worked on it is terrible. Not that everyone does that, but it's so I completely understand that.
It's the hyperboles that don't need to be anywhere ever. And that's what the internet, as I say, a hyperbole, that is what the internet often is. It's people building on each other. Somebody says, I went to that thing and it wasn't great. The next person has to say, oh God, it was horrible. The next person has to say, that was the worst thing I've seen in months. And then the next person's like, that was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. That happens, and that's just gross to me.
Yeah, no, and it's it's one of those things where the internet is, as you've seen with Inside the Magic, can be an amazing place to connect with people all over the world and do great things. The flip side is you can connect with everyone, and it's kind of like it has both sides of it. So I'm curious too, as I listen to a lot of things about how podcasts and sites and how you grow them and how you find an audience, if people that are listening wanted, what advice do you have as someone who's kind of gone through it and built an audience, if they're doing a passion project and want to kind of expand it to another level?
The piece of advice that I always give is, and this is what kept me through for however many years I was doing the podcast and subsequently all the other stuff, is produce. I mean, this sounds easier than it is, but it's produce great content regularly. And both sides of that are equally important. It's if you produce great stuff, but you only do it once a year or randomly, I guess is what's worse. If all of a sudden on a Thursday some stuff comes out, and then 2 Tuesdays later something comes out, and then a month later something comes out, nobody can follow that. Nobody knows where your stuff's coming from unless each thing is like amazing, mind-blowing, earth-shattering feature-length motion picture or something. It's great to do that, but to the point where you can also do it every week or every other week or every month. Set a schedule for yourself so that people can expect it. I mean, it's why TV has always worked really well. People know their favorite show is coming on Thursday at 6:00 and they can watch it. Or, I mean, these days it's Netflix or whatever. But they know that it's going to appear on Netflix on this day. There's some regularity to it. You got to have some kind of a schedule for, build that anticipation, build people's connection to look forward to something. I had so many people over the years tell me that on the off chance that I wasn't able to release something on a Sunday, I had to delay it to Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday because of the event or this or that or life. People would write to me on that Monday and be like, Monday mornings when I drive to work, I always listen to your show. Where was it? I was like, yes, it's that. That's exactly what it is. It's producing something that people want to listen to because it's good and make sure it's there when they want it. As far as what that content is, that's such a huge question. It's about bringing your own passion and excitement for something into it, and hoping to find others that share that. And if that's 4 people or 4 million people, that's hard to say.
No, and there are whole podcasts that are just about this question. So I know that, but I think that's a really good answer because, like you've said, there's so many different people doing things in every market or every niche that one is doing great quality, but also, like you said, just being consistent. So I want to ask one more thing here before we finish, which is the big question, obviously. This year, you decided, I'm sure you decided well before it, but it actually happened to sell Inside the Magic, which was a huge success, but you've been working on it for, 10 plus years. When did you start to feel like it was the right time to sell, and why did you do it?
Yeah, no, definitely. It was definitely before this year that I thought about it. The deal itself was many months in the making, but it was I can't put a specific point on a date, but it was definitely within the last 2 to 3 years as I started to get my feet wet into the creative world, working with Pseudonym. And I also worked with a local haunted house, the Radley Haunt down in St. Petersburg. Really enjoyed doing that. And I had always wanted to get into that creative side. I mean, that goes all the way back to college when I entered the Imaginations competition. It's like I wanted that, but I never wanted the corporate thing. And so I never really figured out what that meant for me until finally the opportunity sort of presented itself. But right away, I definitely didn't think, I'm gonna get rid of this and do this. No, by no means. That it was a tough decision to sell Inside the Magic. And even at first, I didn't think sell was an option. I didn't even know what that meant. My first thought was just, okay, if I'm going to be focusing, splitting my attention, I need help. And so that's when I started bringing people on. And I realized through the course of that they, as a team, were doing a fantastic job to the point where I was just kind of supervising. I was making sure that the vision was upheld, but that I was letting them do the bulk of the quote unquote work. And so along the way, as I got more and more into the creative, the design side of things, I just realized that my brain was having a hard time switching gears between the two. Covering the very industry that I was creating something in, that's a weird combination of things. And so I had to sort of, I guess at some point I was just like, let me explore the idea of what it would mean potentially if I no longer had Inside the Magic. And I went down a very long, sort of path of discovery there, and eventually, reached the conclusion of, well, okay, it's been a great run. I'd rather, sort of part ways with it when I'm still feeling really good about it than after years and years and I'm sort of beat down and done. So it just felt like the right time.
Yeah, I mean, for a good chunk of your adult life to be doing it, I can understand, especially given now what you're doing with Pseudonym, that there's a point when you're the time's going to feel right. You're not going
Right.
to,
And here's one more thing that I don't know why this has always stuck with me for my whole life, but years and years and years ago, I don't even remember the circumstances, but I was on a cruise and the cruise you do sort of the group dinner thing sometimes, and I was sitting at a table with these random people, and one of them was this older man, probably, I don't know, he's retirement age. And, inevitably the question of, oh, what do you do comes up. His response just blew me away. He was like, well, currently I'm just kind of enjoying my life, lounging on the beach or whatever. But I was a surgeon. I was the conductor of an orchestra. I was this. And he rattled off all these things that you normally would think, oh, that's a lifelong career. And he spent a few years doing this, and I thought that was like a mind-blowing moment for me. Like, oh, that life could be that. You don't have to do one thing. You can reinvent yourself. And so that's kind of what I want to do. Pseudonym is definitely my focus right now. Will it be my focus 20 years from now? Probably not. I'm probably going to be doing something completely different. Maybe I'll be a surgeon. I don't know. Probably not. But the point is, and it really ties into the themes that we are working with Pseudonym, is that people are complex. People want to do a lot of things, whether they realize it or not. And they just need to give themselves an opportunity to do that, an opportunity to even think about doing that. And that's what happened within the last couple of years. When I thought about Inside the Magic, I felt a little bit, I have achieved more with that than I ever dreamed I could have. I'm happy with it. I'd rather leave with it being that and move on to something else. And whether, future endeavors succeed or fail, I'll be happy with having tried.
I can't think of a better way to end the show, but I'd love to give you a moment. If there's anything with Pseudonym that you're currently doing or what you guys are working on, feel free to let us know.
Sure. We're in the process, as I said earlier, of a lot of development. So we're almost considering ourselves a startup at this point, because we've been doing a lot of pop-up experiences, but now we're really sort of focusing on creating a company that can grow. So it's what we're going to be doing is going to be continuously updated over on our website, which we've just since pseudonymproductions.com is a bit of a mouthful. We have a new domain called questionreality.com, which I think speaks to what we're trying to do very well. And so that is where updates can be found as we're moving forward. And in the near future, we're going to be, seeking as we develop our concepts, we're going to be seeking partners and investors and all of that. So if anyone's interested in getting in on the ground level of what is probably the most exciting entertainment company around, if I do say so myself. Oh God, that sounds horrible. Just, you can send us an email. It's literally us responding to everything. It's a handful of people who are trying to do cool stuff. So there it is.
Okay, well, great. Do you want to give the email info if people want to reach out to you?
My personal email at Pseudonym is Ricky, RICKY, @questionreality.com.
Awesome. Well, Ricky, this has been amazing to talk with you, and I really thanks so much for doing it. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's good to be doing the podcasting thing again.
Well, that was really cool. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ricky. He's not as present in the Disney community right now. I loved having the chance to catch up with him and find out what he's doing right now. And if you'd like to catch up with what I'm doing, of course, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com or follow me on Twitter @TomorrowSOC or Facebook or Instagram @TomorrowSociety. You can always send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. And a great way to keep up with the podcast, of course, is to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or with your current podcast provider. And if you'd like to support the show, if you go to tomorrowsociety.com/support, there's a few different ways there where you can help out and keep the show going strong. The music for this podcast is written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. You should definitely check out Adam's music. He has an album of rock and pop songs. Pick up a copy at adamhucke.com. In 2 weeks, I'll be talking with Shannon Albert, who is the owner of WDW Prep School and the WDW Prep to Go podcast. I cannot wait to learn more about her story and how her site and show came together. As always, thanks so much to all of you out there for your support and for listening. It makes a huge difference in making me want to do this show and keep connecting with cool guests. And I will be back talking with you again very soon.